Hey cousins, I'm Shemaya. It's like papaya, except it's not. And this is Plot Twist Please. Welcome to my humble abode. Welcome back to the podcast, y'all. I was taking a break because your girl broke her laptop. She went and said, see you never again. So I'm glad to be back. I am borrowing a laptop now for the time bearing. So I'm so glad to be here. And I'm also glad that you're here at the same time in this serendipitous moment. So, if you don't know, this is a place where I like to talk about media literacy, pop culture, and ways to use those things in order to make our brains a little cozier. So, today I'm going to be talking about bullying. If you like what I'm saying to you, go ahead and press that like button, press that follow button, or press that subscribe button and become a patron for more juicy content. Thanks so much. Let's get into it. So, the question I hope to answer by the end of this episode is, how do we define bullying, and when is it okay to label something as such? Yeah, I know what you're thinking. Bullying is such a strong word, it's so polarizing. But trust me, people have lots and lots of different definitions and can't seem to agree on what bullying actually is. So, why am I talking about this, and why now? Well, right now, there's a lot popping up in the media about dating power imbalances, stars who meet an older person who's a celebrity when they're young, around 19, 18 years old, and then 10 plus years later, when we as audiences or as fans find out that this has happened a decades ago before we even knew that it was not okay for lots of reasons. We find out about celebrities who excessively date younger people. We don't hear as much about older women dating younger men, but what tends to be the focus is older men dating younger women, which is fascinating to me, honestly. Plus, in light of so many things coming up in the media about predation and people who have been groomed by famous people or by celebrities with a lot of power, people with a lot of money and influence, imbalance of power, so interesting to me. And to a lot of people, it seems, for lots of reasons. And one of those reasons being that it can be extremely dangerous. But the interesting thing about this is people have lots of different ideas of what is a power imbalance and what is not considered a power imbalance. And now it seems like bullies have a new tool, the internet. It has never been this easy to terrorize someone. And the interesting thing to me about bullies is that a lot of people don't consider themselves to be bullies because a lot of people want to think that they're good people. It's intrinsic to human nature to want to be the good guy. I mean, you are in fact the protagonist in your own life, so why can't you be the protagonist in everyone else's? Or so we think. There's a story I'm going to share with you later in this episode that you probably know already based on the news, but I'm also going to share with you one that you probably are not as familiar with. But before we get into that, we have to first talk about how we define bullying. So, what is bullying? So, one source says that bullying is a form of aggressive behavior in which someone intentionally and repeatedly causes another person injury or discomfort. Bullying can take the form of physical contact, words, or more subtle actions. This definition is from the American Psychological Association. Another definition is bullying is unwanted aggressive behavior among school-age children that involves a real or perceived power imbalance. Now, the distinction here with the stopbullying.gov definition is the introduction of a power imbalance within the definition, one that can be perceived or actually tangible. Another definition states that bullying is an ongoing and deliberate misuse of power in relationships through repeated verbal, physical, and or social behavior that intends to cause physical, social, and or psychological harm. So this definition highlights the need of a consistent intentional effort in order for something to be classified as bullying. The definition goes on to explain that it can involve an individual or a group misusing their power or perceived power, there's that again, over one or more persons who feel unable to stop it from happening. By this definition, and I think this is more applicable to modern times with the internet, it's explained how this bullying can happen online or in person via digital platforms and devices, and it can be either overt or covert behind closed doors. Bullying is repeated by this definition or has the potential to be repeated over time, for example, through sharing of digital records. Bullying of any form or for any reason can have immediate, medium, and long term effects on those involved. including bystanders. Now, this definition also includes other people who are not in the direct conflict, in the direct line of fire, which I think is fascinating. Single incidents and conflict or fights between equals, whether in person or online, are not defined as bullying by this definition. Now, this definition also goes on to explain what bullying is not. And it says that single episodes of social rejection or dislike, single episode acts of nastiness or spite, random acts of aggression or intimidation, mutual agreements or disagreements, or fights aren't under the bullying umbrella. This is by the National Centre Against Bullying in Australia. So, what are the major themes here? To me, they are influence, that's one pillar of bullying, on population and influence on an individual. And the other main thing I see, the main theme I see here is marginalization or something that could lend itself to marginalization. Because if we're talking about power and systems of oppression, then it can be really easy for someone who sits higher on a hierarchy in society to bully someone who's lower on that hierarchy. Because if someone's lower in a hierarchy, they may not feel like them speaking up or them even telling a teacher or a trusted adult or a colleague about what they're going through is going to make much of a difference just because of the way society works. It's the regulation, regular racism, marginalization, the way people treat others differently based on where they are in that hierarchy. You get the gist. Yes, I'm back filming on another day because my computer was taking a really long time to upload the last episode, and so I really was nervous about it and decided to just pause in the middle of recording because I was like, this stuff is not about to disappear. Listen, child, listen, you better look at me in the eyes and listen to me. You better not combust on me because I have seen it all. I have been through so many electronics in the process of filming this one episode, and I'm not about to go backwards. We will press on, beloved. Hopefully these hot off the press takes by this point are not lukewarm, but we'll see. We're just, creator economy. So what happens when there are two people who seem like they acquire the same amount of power? Because with celebrities versus regular people, it's pretty obvious divide, it's pretty obvious difference, all right? But what happens if you have two people who are of the same age and maybe the same socioeconomic group, maybe have the same influence? What do you do about that? This is when the conversation gets really interesting because when you see debates about people who are dating who have a significant age difference and the older one is the man, I think it's dicey because I think when the woman is younger, if they met like after her prefrontal lobe is formed, which is like a part of the brain that like is responsible for making decisions and as far as we know, helps you make quote unquote mature decisions versus the decisions that of a child. But that's based on neurology. Like you're fully formed. Your brain is fully formed by the time for a woman you're about 24 or 25. So if someone, in my opinion, starts dating around that time, I'm like, all right, it's cool. Y'all just kikiing. I mean, who am I to tell you what to do? But if it's earlier than that, like if they meet earlier than that and the guy is like, say like 56 and she's like 19, I'm low key like, what is he getting out of this besides that power dynamic? Like what and like a young thing, like a young beautiful woman. Like what could he possibly be getting out of it? And that's when I start to wonder about whether there's grooming taking place. But I also think that there's an interesting discussion going on online right now about infantilization. Like there are some people who look at those women and would interpret them as, strong, capable, independent people who are capable of making their own decisions, which they are. But I also don't think that that takes away from the influence of power in a relationship. And I don't think it makes those concerns any less valid, right? Because yes, one could claim that saying that a woman is incapable of making her own decisions is infantilization, and at its core, yes, it is. And also blanketed in misogyny, but also there's something very real, something very tangible about the consequences of being a single woman in society who is unmarried, right? Because when you are a married woman, there are certain things that legally you have access to. Statistically, women who are married have more access to capital because of the men Because in this patriarchal system, right, the men can have access to more capital and can rise up in the ranks in society based on that alone. But the woman connected to him also arguably gains those same benefits. So that's why it's like tricky, because it's like, yes, these women are gaining things from these kinds of relationships, but also know very well what they are signing up for. Some of them, I'd argue, know that they are curating this life where they are the pretty young thing in his arm, and they're perfectly okay with that because they get to, have brunch in Paris whenever they want. Like, it's, I feel like some women are very much okay with that. And frankly, I'm okay with that if they're okay with that and there's no grooming going on. But if it's fishy, like when it comes to age, like I'm not going to sit here and lie to you. That's kind of the kind of smells kind of funky to me. But stepping away from the grooming conversation and getting back to the bullying conversation when it comes to power dynamics, what are some examples when it comes to who has the power and who doesn't? So, what I've learned from these definitions is that lots of different organizations catered toward this subject matter do have different ideas about what bullying can be defined as, but all of them come down to one central idea. Well, I'd say two. One, bullying has to involve a power imbalance, whether that is perceived power or actual influence on a person or on a multitude of people. Now, the thing that I'm realizing is that a lot of the time, perceived power is almost the same thing as actual power. If someone thinks you have a lot of influence, that can affect whether or not they choose to engage in corrective behavior or corrective measures toward your behavior, or whether they choose to speak up about how your behavior makes them feel at all. So we've established is power and perception almost go hand in hand. So if someone is perceived to having more power, odds are it's because they actually do. Like if you look at somebody like Beyonce or Taylor Swift, of course they have a lot of power and influence because so many people know who they are. Whether people like them or not, they are celebrities. And that comes with the power imbalance if they're interacting with regular schmegular civilians. Now you also have a situation like the one with SZA and one of her fans. I don't know if you know about this, but basically one of her fans exposed something about SZA that SZA was talking about incompetence. Um, and it goes really deep. There's a lot that actually happened, but a lot of people argued that the fan actually not necessarily held the position of power, but that the fan was actually exploiting SZA in a really disgusting way, just based on human decency. Now, SZA arguably would have more power in the situation, but still, I think there's a level of humanness that people lack when interacting with celebrities on that level. Now, it's really complicated when we talk about celebritism, and it's a whole other episode. But that's just one element where the position of power doesn't have as much of an effect on the discourse. But now I want to talk about something that has to do a little bit about this, but I think has more widespread application: the internet. The funny thing about the internet is that it puts a lot of people in a position of power who are regular schmegular civilians. Now, one person can interact with another person who is not necessarily famous, but the influence of the internet and having access to so many people who can pile on to a sentiment that you're already putting on there can be so powerful, for better or for worse. We all have these little devices now that make us wielders of other people's fates in such an interesting way that I don't think has ever been replicated in history to this point. Anyone can be an influencer. Anyone can be powerful because of the device in their hand. Having the ability to record something that someone is doing in the moment and use it as a blackmail, having the ability to keep receipts on someone who you know intimately and blast their business to the entire world if you wanted to, that's so much power. What is disheartening, though, is that what I find a lot of the time is people misusing that power. Now, let's visit somebody who we probably haven't visited in the social zeitgeist on the internet in a while. Rebecca Black. You remember her? The Friday, Friday, Friday. That's her. And that's my best impersonation. You're welcome. But basically, she was an internet personality who released a song in the early 2000s that people thought was hilarious, but for all the wrong reasons. For a lot of reasons that I think might be justified, but at the same time, I think about how she was a teenager when she released that song and how that song became basically a pop culture phenomenon for all the wrong reasons. And I think about what she must have gone through as an individual, being made fun of, being famous, essentially, for being bad at something that she desperately wanted to be good at. And I know I took part in the making fun and the meme culture when it came to Black, as well as other people who represent similar things and who did similar things. But in hindsight, I can't help but think of how she as a person went through so much turmoil, and she has even spoken about this publicly about how much she was bullied at school and how much she had to go through therapy and how much she had to build herself up from the ground up because of how much she was being made fun of, both in person and online. I think about that and I wonder if we take this meme culture too far in instances like that, with phenomenons like that. Do we actually forget, like, if there's a sociopathic nature that comes with being online all the time, and that comes with having power at our fingertips to essentially destroy someone's life if we want to? What kind of thing does that do to a person mentally to have that much power? And what kind of thing does that do to somebody who suffers at the hands of that power? Now, a lot of you may not know this. Maybe you do if you've been following me for a while, but I'm an autistic adult. And for a long time, I was an autistic child who endured bullying without actually knowing that it was bullying. I'll talk about that more on the Patreon. But what I did know was that I was different. And a lot of autistic people actually talk about experiencing this feeling of otherness, not knowing why, not knowing exactly what made you so alien, but knowing that you were alien. The thing about me, though, is because I live in this body, even though I was a black girl in suburbia, like, I don't know how I would be being black in suburbia, but that, even though that was my reality, I also had a lot of feminine, demure, traditionally attractive features. And so that created a really interesting predicament where I could kind of, dance on this line of being weird, but also not being, quote, ugly enough to be ostracized for being weird. Because I came in this package, it was more manic pixie dream girl weird rather than like, ew, we don't want to talk to you, you're not invited to our table weird. What I ended up doing was trying as hard as I can by any means necessary to not seem like those weird kids who I saw in the hallways who were obviously different, but who couldn't mask it as well as I could, didn't know how to hide it, or didn't want to hide it. And honestly, that put me in such a prison of my own mind of trying to appeal to other people in order to seem, quote, normal. But at the time, it seemed like the right path to survival or to blend in for as much as I could. Even though in the end, it's like, girl, you were, everyone knew. Like, it's fine. Like, you weren't as good at hiding as you thought you were. But yeah, I would hide my work and I would think it was benefiting me.
Now, this is not something that I'm proud of as I reflect on it today, but what is very clear to me is that I knew right away that there was some power imbalance between the people who were deemed as normal and the people who were not. So, what's this huge debate about, right? Well, I think what it is people disagree on what power actually is. Is power systemic? Is it race, class, and age based? Is it based on how much money you have access to? Honestly, I think it's a combination of all of those things. We think about grooming and how child grooming refers to actions or behaviors used to establish an emotional connection with a minor, and how that is inherently really predatory and gross and based on trying to exert your power over somebody else in order to control them, and sometimes even the child's family, in order to lower the child's inhibitions with the objective of sexual abuse or other kind of exploitation. I mean, you think about Colleen Ballinger and how outraged people were at that, and it's right for people to be offended by that. I think that's heading in a good direction, that we're starting to condemn that kind of behavior by people in power. I also think that what's become important is the aspect of celebritism. When we talk about power and access and influence, people who are celebrities have so much control. And sometimes they ask for that power and sometimes they don't. But once you have it, whether you have asked for it or not. So, knowing all this, right? What happens when there are two individuals who seem like they're in the same category, right? Who seem like they're on equal footing? Remember when I said I'd have a story you probably heard of? Now's the time for that story. You may have heard about the Long Island cheerleader who was 16 who sued Smithsonian West High School for $6 million after she was bullied by her classmates who filmed themselves with their phones pulling her hair, punching her, and calling her horse girl after her emotional support animal had to get put down. Among other things, this group of girls terrorized her. And the most disappointing part of the story is that Her parents told the administration at her school. Apparently, nothing was done about it, maybe a few disciplinary conversations, but nothing substantial. As a result, the parents pulled the kid out of school and started homeschooling her, to only be met with friction from the administration due to their fear of her not getting a good enough education from home. So they ended up having to put her back in the school where she was bullied even more, and where a second incident of her being filmed while being bullied took place and was posted online. Like, the evidence is there. It was for everyone to see. So it's kind of like, you can't just kind of close your eyes and walk around and say you don't see it, because it's right there. I'm actually going to go into a personal story about this on the Patreon page. I won't do this on the main podcast or on the main channel, but if you want to hear that story, then go ahead and become a patron. But I will press forward. Now, stories like this are really do hit me in a really sensitive spot, because I know how preventable bullying is. And bullying has become easier and easier to get away with now, because it doesn't have to be putting a camera up to someone's face. It can be behind a screen in your own home when nobody else is awake. Now, here's a story you might not be familiar with. 11 years ago, an autistic Black boy in a Detroit public school was bullied but couldn't tell anyone. There were 4 students who cornered him in the bathroom, chased him down the hall, and attacked him. And this happened several times. Now, a teacher reportedly heard yelling and screaming in the bathroom one day and then told them to come out, but further action wasn't taken. And the teacher didn't report it. So, fast forward some months later, 2 of those students who were caught eventually were transferred to other schools. One returned based on insufficient evidence, and another was expelled. So the mother of this autistic child didn't know, first of all, that their child was going to the bathroom unsupervised. I can't help but see the similarities between this and the first story. I just feel like everyone is sick. Everyone is sick in the head a little bit. Everyone needs mental health care. And maybe there would be less school shootings. Maybe there will be less bullying if mental health resources were more attainable. Now, for those people who have been bullied and are in the process of healing, I'm here to tell you that it's hard. It's hard to release your past and let it be your past. It's hard not to carry those voices with you that are not yours, right? That are other people who have criticized you and ostracized you and hurt you. But let me just tell you something. You were not bullied because you're broken. The way that you think now, the way that you tell your story, your own story in your head, can drastically change the course of your life. The thing too is the brain likes to trick us, right? The brain likes to make us justify the things that have happened to us in order to make sense of it, especially when we've been through intense trauma. I learned the other day in a diversity and inclusion workshop that your brain would rather be right than to keep you happy. Isn't that wild? Isn't that wild that your brain wants so badly to make sense of things that it is okay with you being perpetually unhappy? So, what I had to do was make my body happy in order for my brain to be at peace. That is something that I'm honestly still working on, because when you are hurt consistently, it is so easy, especially as an autistic person, to make it your fault. But the way someone treats you is not an indicator of your value. It's just not. Some people are not for you. And you deserve to be in community with people who will make space for your quirks, who will make space for your needs. So I guess to end this episode, all I'll say is you are worth investing in, you are worth spending time with, and you don't need anyone to prove that to you. And healing will come. It just takes time. It takes work. And sometimes it takes making your body happy before your brain gets there. Listen to the music you like. Watch something that brings you back to a childlike and innocent place, that brings the light back to your eyes. Because those tangible things are out there. Sometimes you have to feel the happy before you think the happy, if that makes sense. That's all I have for you today. Thanks so much for listening. Become a patron or like, share, and subscribe. Be blessed and stay weird. Okay.